The U.S. Open is a theater of dreams. Each year, the flashing lights of New York City illuminate Flushing Meadows, and the world's best step onto the court to chase tennis immortality. For Britain, all eyes were on one man, Jack Draper. At just 23 years old, the rising star had already carved his name into the elite. Last year's semifinal run wasn't a fluke. It was a statement. Draper had arrived. This season, he came not as an outsider, but as the fifth seed, a genuine title contender. Many whispered that 2025 might be his year. But then, in a twist that no fan could have predicted, Britain's number one walked away from the tournament before it had truly begun. The reason? A brutal, unforgiving injury to his serving arm. Draper, the man who was meant to carry the flag for British tennis deep into the second week, had no choice but to pull out. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Jack Draper withdraws from the U.S. Open. This wasn't just disappointing news. It was a hammer blow to a sporting nation desperate for glory. Draper had been painted as the natural heir to Andy Murray, the man to rekindle Britain's Grand Slam fire. His mix of athleticism, icy composure, and raw determination had captured imaginations. Yet in sport, dreams often hang by the thinnest of threads. For Draper, that thread snapped in the cruelest of ways, his own body rebelling against him at the very moment he needed it most. Fans remember his opening round clash against Argentina's Federico Agustin Gomez. Draper battled through 4 difficult sets, the fight of a warrior written on his face. But observant eyes noticed something was off. His serve lacked its usual venom. His movements carried a hint of restraint, as though he was fighting more than just his opponent across the net. And then came his confession. Posting on X, Draper wrote with brutal honesty, "I tried my very best to be here and give myself every chance to play, but the discomfort in my arm has become too much. I have to do what is right and look after myself." In that moment, hope gave way to heartbreak. A young man's dream and a nation's belief shattered in an instant. The New York skyline has seen countless stories of triumph and despair. But for Jack Draper, this was not the coronation so many had expected. It was a cruel reminder. In sport, glory and tragedy often walk hand in hand. To understand the devastation of Draper's U.S. Open withdrawal, one must rewind the clock a few months. His downfall in New York wasn't born overnight. It was the culmination of a battle his body had been waging since the clay court season. It began innocently enough back in April during the European swing. A dull ache in his left arm, the serving arm that has so often been his greatest weapon, started to make itself known. At first it seemed like the sort of niggle every professional carries, the price of relentless competition. But this was no ordinary discomfort. Doctors soon revealed it was a bruised humerus, the bone that runs from the shoulder to the elbow. A rare and particularly cruel injury for a tennis player whose entire game hinges on explosive power from that arm. Through May and June, Draper tried to push through, but the pain shadowed him like a constant reminder that he was playing on borrowed time. The grass court season, where British players didn't traditionally thrive, offered no respite. At Wimbledon, the tournament Draper had dreamed of conquering since childhood, the injury tightened its grip. His campaign ended prematurely in the second round, a bitter pill for both player and nation. Center court, which had embraced him as a new hero, was left stunned and subdued. It was then that Draper made a difficult but necessary choice. He pulled out of the Canadian Open in Cincinnati, 2 key tune-ups for the U.S. Open. On paper, it looked like a bold gamble. Rest now to be ready for New York. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to give his arm a fighting chance. By the time he landed in the United States, Draper spoke with optimism, insisting he was ready. He wore a compression sleeve on his injured arm, a visible reminder that not all was well, but his words betrayed determination. He told reporters he had done everything possible to recover, and he vowed not to hold back when the first ball was struck in New York. Behind closed doors, however, there were whispers. Sparring partners noticed his serve lacked its usual thunder. Coaches observed his training sessions carefully, urging him not to overextend. Even as Draper smiled for cameras, there was an undercurrent of worry. Everyone in his circle knew that one wrong move could bring the whole campaign crashing down. The cruel irony of it is that Draper's game looked sharp. His forehand, his movement, his tactical patience, all intact. Yet the very foundation of his arsenal, the serve, was compromised. It was as if an artist had been asked to paint without his finest brush, or a singer to perform with a strained voice. And still, Draper pressed forward. For him, Wimbledon's disappointment could not be the end. The U.S. Open was his chance at redemption. At least that was the plan. When Jack Draper finally stepped onto the hard courts of Flushing Meadows, the crowd saw a fighter ready to prove himself. His opening match against Argentine qualifier Federico Agustin Gomez was supposed to be routine. Instead, it turned into a 4-set test that revealed both his resilience and his fragility. Draper prevailed, but their performance raised eyebrows. His usually ferocious serve lacked its trademark venom. Observers noticed he was relying on precision and placement rather than raw power, a tactical adjustment that hinted at deeper struggles. To the public, Draper smiled and spoke confidently afterward, insisting he was ready to go. Yet for those with sharper eyes, the warning signs were unmistakable. The sleeve on his serving arm, the cautious rhythm in his motion, the way he stretched his shoulder between points, these were not the habits of a man fully fit. Behind every forehand winner, there was a shadow of a doubt. In victory, Draper had shown courage, but in truth, it was the kind of win that whispered danger louder than it shouted promise. The day after his hard-fought victory, Draper returned to the practice courts at Flushing Meadows. To casual onlookers, it was business as usual, thundering forehands, sharp footwork, a determined expression. But those watching closely saw the truth. Between drills, Draper stretched his left arm, wincing ever so slightly. His team exchanged quiet glances, their concern masked behind encouraging words. On Tuesday, he pushed harder, attempting to leather a few forehands, testing the limits of his injured arm. For brief moments, he looked every inch the top 10 player Britain had come to believe in. Yet the effort came at a cost. The strain was visible, his body language more subdued, his energy drained far too quickly for someone preparing to chase a Grand Slam title. By Wednesday morning, the whispers had turned into certainty. Draper practiced again, but this time there was no disguising the discomfort. Each swing looked like a negotiation with pain, every serve a gamble. For the first time, the dream of New York glory truly seemed to hang by a thread. By midday Wednesday, the inevitable became reality. Draper, after one final training session, gathered with his team and made the call no athlete ever wants to make. He would withdraw from the U.S. Open. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire across Flushing Meadows and beyond. Fans who had pinned their hopes on Britain's rising star were left stunned, journalists scrambling to capture the gravity of the moment. On social media, Draper's words were raw and heartfelt. I tried my very best to be here and give myself every chance to play, but the discomfort in my arm has become too much. I have to do what is right and look after myself. The honesty struck a chord, but it also deepened the heartbreak. Former players weren't surprised. Andrea Petkovic, speaking on BBC Radio 5 Live, noted, "Bone injuries are difficult to handle. They can always come back if you return too soon." Her words confirmed what many feared. Draper's body had forced him into retreat. For Britain, it wasn't just a withdrawal. It felt like a dream suddenly ripped away. Draper's withdrawal didn't just end his U.S. Open campaign. It set off a chain reaction with serious consequences for his season. Last year's semifinal run had secured him a treasure chest of ranking points, and now those points were set to vanish. Without them, Britain's number one faces the harsh reality of tumbling out of the world's top 10. For a player who had climbed so quickly, it is a brutal reminder of how unforgiving the ranking system can be. The implications stretch further still. The ATP Finals, tennis's elite season-ending showdown, had looked well within Draper's reach, but with this setback, his chances are suddenly in jeopardy. Unless he returns quickly and finds a form immediately, the dream of rubbing shoulders with the year's very best could slip away. For Draper, the challenge now is twofold: heal his body and rebuild his campaign. For Britain, the question is clear: will their brightest hope rise again before the season ends, or must the nation wait a little longer for its next Grand Slam hero? Behind the official statements and polished press releases, whispers of tension echoed through Draper's camp. Some insiders suggested heated debates had taken place between the player and his coaching staff. Draper, ever the competitor, wanted to push through the pain. His team, fearing permanent damage, urged caution. The decision to withdraw was not just medical, it was emotional, a clash between ambition and responsibility. Meanwhile, the British press circled like hawks. Headlines speculated about the severity of the injury, pundits debated whether Draper had rushed his comeback, and fans flooded social media with both heartbreak and support. Some feared this setback could define his career. Others believed it would forge him stronger. In hotel corridors and late-night strategy meetings, Draper and his team faced difficult truths. This was not simply the end of a tournament, but a crossroads. Would he be remembered as a star cruelly undone by injury, or as a warrior who rose from adversity and conquered the biggest stages once more? For now, Jack Draper's U.S. Open dream lies shattered, scattered on the hard courts of Flushing Meadows. But if history teaches us anything, it's that true champions are not defined by their victories alone, but by how they rise after heartbreak. Draper's journey is at a crossroads, one path filled with uncertainty, the other with the promise of redemption. As he returns home to rehabilitate, questions linger. How long will he be sidelined? Can his fragile arm withstand the brutal demands of the tour? Will he find the strength, both physical and mental, to climb back into the top 10 and stake his claim at the ATP Finals? These are not just sporting questions. They are human ones. For Draper, it's about identity, resilience, and the hunger to prove that setbacks do not define destinies. British tennis has seen this story before. Andy Murray, battling his own injuries, became a symbol of determination. Draper now finds himself in similar territory, a young man carrying the hopes of a nation while wrestling with the limits of his own body. The difference? Draper's story is still unwritten, and the next chapter could yet become his greatest. So to every fan watching, this is more than a news story. It's a saga still unfolding. Draper's U.S. Open may be over, but his fight is far from finished. If you want to witness the comeback, the moments of doubt, the flashes of brilliance, and perhaps the birth of Britain's next great champion, stay with us. Because when Jack Draper steps back onto a Grand Slam court, it won't just be another match. It will be the continuation of a story that has already captured the nation's heart. If you felt the heartbreak, the drama, and the anticipation of what comes next, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Draper's journey is far from over, and you won't want to miss a single twist.